Gauntlet Podcast. My name is Jason, and today I am joined by game designer Rob Bohl. Rob is getting ready to kickstart his a new edition of his classic story game, Misspent Youth, and we're going to talk about that and some other things. Rob, welcome back to the Gauntlet Podcast.
Hey, Jason. It's really good to be back.
I think the last time we had you on was for the Three Forged retrospective, right?
That sounds like 100
years ago. Yeah.
I listened to you guys ever since I started listening to, especially since the election, I started listening to gaming podcasts again because I suddenly had a big vacuum in what I could bear to tolerate,
right? Yeah.
Which is on theme. And I've kept up with your show and I always feel like, I have something to say, so it's nice to be on here.
Awesome. Well, we are going to talk about a lot of stuff today, mostly revolving around Misspent Youth. I will say that Misspent Youth it's one of my favorite games, one of my very favorite games. And I don't mean like favorite story game or favorite role-playing game. I mean like favorite games, full stop. I love Misspent Youth. The world creation that you engage in as a group, the core mechanic is so good at like delivering what it's, what you're trying to do in terms of like the story. The structure of Misspent Youth is great. But for people who have maybe not heard of Misspent Youth or aren't, or haven't thought about it in a while, give us an overview. Like, what is Misspent Youth about? What are its themes? What are the players doing?
My face hurts from the smiling. Thank you. It's really an honor for you to say that, especially, I know how into games you are. So yay. Anyway, so Misspent Youth is a tabletop role-playing game where you play out the story of a group of teenagers, 12 to 17-year-olds who are the only ones who can save the world from an authority. You create the authority first so that you're bought in, and so that you care about the world and so that your characters address the situation. Anyway, the idea is in every episode, it's got a 3-act structure to it. So you tell a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And there's some math that, semi-randomly determines the number of sessions you're going to wind up having. And then the question is, if you burned enough of your soul, when you burn your soul at the end, that's how you get into endgame. Someone basically has to burn out everything that's noble about themselves, and then they're no longer heroes. And then we went to the endgame phase, and in that phase, you figure out, if you change the world enough in each episode to make the world a better place, and if you yourself have been irrevocably changed and in what ways. Sorry, I know that was a lot longer.
No, that's great. That's perfect. This idea of the characters being these youth who are fighting against this authority, against the man. And interestingly, one of their biggest powers, so to speak, they can invoke against the authority is selling out, essentially, right? Like it's one of the main things they can do, which also paradoxically pushes you toward endgame, right? It's really great. I'm really curious about where you came up with that idea, this idea of the characters eventually selling out, or that being a main feature.
So early on in Misspent Youth, I wanted to have a way to represent damage that wasn't hit points. And it occurred to me that narrative damage was the way to go, So yeah, I wanted to do narrative damage, and I play tested, I think, a version of it. Maybe this is before I had play tested it, and I brought it to a double exposure convention back when they were in an entirely different town in East Brunswick, and they used to have at the end of each convention there would be an indie designer roundtable where a bunch of people would sit around a table and you could come up with your question with your game. And receive tough love, but love from the designers. Because tough love was a really big thing, back in that era. So in that context, I asked my friend. I asked everybody, how do I? I'm thinking about this. What are good ways to do that? And my friend Judd Carlman, who I've known since 1985, who I got into role playing, and who got me reflexively, or vice versa, he got me into indie games. He suggested, well, what if, when something goes bad for you, you have to get a job at McDonald's?
Nice.
And so that kind of eventually became one of the main two ways that you have agency in the game, which is to say, I used to be cool. I'm now going to be trendy. I'm going to sell out and be trendy, and permanently change who I am and horrify everybody and make myself a less cool person. In this case, definitively less cool forever. The authority comes over and scrubs the word cool off of your permanent record, your character sheet. So that's the one main way to do it. And the other main power you have is in the scene framing. Because the way that the game is structured, the authority cannot structurally create a story. It was, play to find out what happens before it was cool and made impossible, rendered impossible. So the idea is by forcing the GM to take all those inputs and say, okay, so now we're inside the bad guy's lair. But we all know what this scene is about. So it's scene 2, which means that this is only as things are rising in response to the first thing that happened. So in that context, we just take that all in and we go. And the reason for that was I was just sick of having to tell people all the time, ask people all the time, what next? What now? And if there was this structured way where everyone knew they were going to have to input what was happening next, they'd all be participant in the story, and it would gain a lot more energy. It wouldn't be pushing a wet noodle up a hill.
Yeah, I think I want to dive into the mechanics stuff here in a bit more. Before we move on, though, from the game's sort of main themes or ideas behind the game, I'll say that one of the reasons why Misspent Youth really spoke to me, from the opening text, when you were dropping F-bombs on me in the beginning, one of the things that spoke to me about Misspent Youth is this idea of, I'll just relate it to my own personal history. I'm an attorney, and my background is civil liberties law, right? That's what I do. It's what I've done in the past. And there was about a 2-year period in my life, most recently, where I started to be pressing up against certain realities. Namely, I could not really afford to be a civil liberties attorney anymore, because it's a not super well paying area of the law. And so I had to take jobs that were more lucrative, but certainly more soul deadening and not particularly exciting, right? And so I think Misspent Youth really, really spoke to me in that way. This idea of you want to make change, but sometimes you are kind of up against it, and you have to kind of make certain decisions, Now, what I want to segue to is I find myself being pulled back into this desire to do more civil liberties type stuff, mostly because of tragic events of the last 6 months or so. And, we live in a particularly tragic and frankly frightening political time in the States, right? And so I'm curious, without trying to sound at all flippant or anything, what do you think that there is space in role-playing games for fighting injustice, or do you think there are things that role-playing games can do to help, make things better? What do you think?
I think the main two ways it can help is, the first most important way is by giving people who are doing meaningful things and who like this hobby a chance to decompress and enjoy themselves, which they might not be able to do with my game. They might want something a little bit that is not so close to home to what they're actually doing. But then again, this is the game where you can punch capitalism in the face and win.
Right, yeah.
So it might be cathartic. But I think the other way is that, I'm trying to say this carefully because I don't want to sound, games that care about power and care about modeling how power can go wrong, and which talk about either structurally in their rules or in their game text as simply as the imperfect inclusion of gender awareness was in 5th edition, it was put there.
Yeah.
All these opportunities for people when they're engaging in fun to realize perspectives that they might not otherwise realize. And of course, that's what role playing is about, right? You have this opportunity to say, what would it be like, if I were, I don't know, if our planet were being invaded, and there were people that came in and they just wanted to kill us because they didn't trust us. They didn't, like us. And there was something useful about our home. And I mean, it's not hard to see the allegory there, and you could be very explicit about the things that it drives you to do, like mechanically, So you can design with that kind of thing in mind. I think that Misspent Youth's most sort of aspirational goal in that regard is like to say that power is structural, which is something that doesn't get addressed a lot. I think it's not something people think about. They think of evil and power as sort of just, they don't think about how it's more than just one person.
Right.
And how integrated it is. And I think that my game models that. But I think there are better games for consciousness raising even than mine. But sort of just simply saying to everybody, hey, remember that when something evil is being done, sometimes you got to be the one to do something about it. And you can get that from D&D. You can get that from Make Pretend or a LARP or whatever. But I do think it's possible to like structurally design games to make you take the kind of societal levers of the world into account,
Yeah,
which is
that's
important.
Awesome.
And then there's other games that like, Monster Heart's powerfully political by being aggressively inclusive of and expressive of the queer experience,
identity,
and like,
absolutely.
Like to the point where like it's a big deal in the second edition to make sure to include asexual characters consideration in a mechanic that's all about involuntary arousal. And so that puts Avery Alder, the designer, in this tough position, but she wants to be welcoming in that way and tell people that you can come in here and you're loved. I think that's really important that she's like willing to cause herself that trouble.
Yeah.
Cause certainly a part of my game design heart to that thing is, well, this is a mechanic. This is a game about people who do get turned on, and that might have been my response. And she's able to figure out a way to design around it, which is why she's really awesome.
Yeah, she is indeed. Okay. Well, let's go back to Misspent Youth. Let's talk about mechanics a little bit because, in addition to the themes, the mechanics are so, they were unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I don't really think I've seen anything like that core mechanic, especially since. And so maybe just unpack a little bit for listeners, kind of like the core conflict resolution mechanic, I think would be great. And then, how you think the mechanics sort of, inform the story, I suppose, like enforce a certain sort of story goal.
So I'm going to define what I think you mean by the core mechanic just to make sure.
Sure, absolutely, of course.
Because, there are several core mechanics, but you're talking about when the dice come out.
Indeed,
the struggle system. Yep. So, once a scene, the authority has the power to decide this is going to be the consequential moment and there will be a struggle over what's going to happen. And that's what it's called. And so what happens is the authority says, well, okay, so I'm going to call for a struggle, and I'm going to describe something terrible happening. Agents come in and bust in the den of the smooth-chested werewolves. And
why would anybody fight against that? That's what I want to know.
Well, clearly there's some kind of magical problem going on with them. I hope I'm not stepping on this end area. Anyway, so I say, so you can hear the sirens, who's going to stand up? And then the first person to say I do, or to grab the dice, gets to and must roll, does not have the option. And a key thing that's very hard for people to understand, the key thing that I had to spend a lot of time explaining. Well, I don't know. I don't want to make too much of a big deal about it. A lot of people get it. But the one thing that people don't get when they don't get this game is that you roll the dice before you decide what you're going to do.
Right.
Because it's so antithetical to the way that most games are designed. Apparently, Hollow Point does some of this stuff too, where you roll a bunch of dice and then you say, okay, so what's going on? And you know what? Dogs in the Vineyard does this too. I kind of stole a bit from Dogs in the Vineyard, because you kind of know what you want, but anyway.
But even in those games, you have a sense of what you want to do before you roll, right? In Misspent
Youth, you do in Misspent Youth, though.
Yeah, in Misspent Youth, you just grab it, right? You just go for it.
Yeah. Oh, before you roll. Yeah. So, but anyway, at the start, which I failed to mention, the authority says, this is what's going to happen if you don't stop me. money. That's their objective. And then the youthful offenders, the YOs or the clique, in response have a group goal. And that goal is their hope, what they hope to get out of it. And these things cannot be negations of one another. They have to each be separate, because if the smooth-chested werewolves lose their home, which is what I want, you don't want to say that they lose their home. You want to say, like, if this struggle that we're having, but the smooth-chested werewolves having their thing. So what would you want out of that? I say they're going to lose their home if I win.
I would, if you say, I have to say, I thought you were saying earlier that the smooth-chested werewolves were the authority. I was like, what? Why would we fight them?
No.
The smooth-chested werewolves in this case are
invaded.
YOs. Oh, okay. Yeah. So you're saying the authority, I can't imagine what the authority would be in this circumstance, because who would want to harm
Well, I mean, the first
werewolves?
thing I think of is people who have problems with either, religious prudes who have problems with werewolves and people having the sex they'd like.
So if you were saying, okay, the authority says we are going to turn them out of their home.
Yeah, we're going to take your den.
Right. I would just say, we're going to fight back. We're going to drive you away. Right.
Right. But that's a negation.
Right.
So you don't want just a negation. You want something else. I'm taking away your home. Do something worse to me. Take away something from me. Yeah.
But in any case, I just grabbed the die before I maybe even decided what that is, right?
No, because before I ask, so there's a trigger word for grabbing the dice. Mm-hmm. Remember, I jumped a step. So at the start of it all, I say, what do you want out of it? Then I say, I'm doing this awful thing. Who's going to stand up? So maybe you would want to out one of the people as someone having gone there or something.
Sure.
Embarrass. But the better way to say it is to embarrass the bad guys, the authority. Sure. And so, or to show them as hypocrites. Anyway, so the idea is that you grab the dice, you roll, and then you say what you're going to do afterwards, because you roll, and for the first roll, there's nothing is going to happen. You just, whatever number you get, you pick one of your convictions, one of the things about you, like say you're cool, and you put it down and you say, well, I'm cool. So I calm everyone down and I say, we're going to just get on through this, Then the authority says something and claims some numbers. So maybe you grabbed 6 with that die roll. Mm-hmm. Now the authority grabs, a couple numbers and says, okay, so now they're at the door banging on the door. Who's going to stand up? Someone grabs the dice again. At this point, there's several numbers that have been claimed, right? After that first roll, you're in the clear. But this time, there are some numbers that the authority controls and some numbers that the Yos control. The next person to roll, they can't say what they're going to do before they roll, because they may land on either one of the authorities' chips, in which case they've lost or are going to have to sell out, or they land on your chip, in which case they're going to do something in your cool way. So that was a problem initially in the design, until I realized it was a feature that you have to jump into this saying, because if you say, all right, so the next thing I'm going to do once he says he's going to calm everyone down, before I even listen to what the authority has to say, I decide that I'm going to start tunneling my way. So the authority says that they're what they're going to do. I turn into a wolf. I start tunneling. I'm going to roll though. I have to roll. That's right. I roll. But now I rolled cool instead of fast. I had this plan of what I was going to do, but now we're winning. Right, yeah. And it's this stutter step that's bad. So the idea is, it's the youthful exuberance. It's the, oh, fuck no. I can't allow that to happen, whatever that is. And then you roll. And it drives the skill for the authority is to keep finding goads, not just to say this is the next thing that happens, but the next thing that makes someone go, oh my God, there's something we have to do about that, And so it goes back and forth until someone hits one of those things. I don't know how far into the mechanic you want to go. I did answer the question.
No, I love it. And I think one of the things that I remember really loving about the game is how well it models this idea of, like you said, of youthful exuberance, right? Like our backs are up against the wall. This idea of this like ritual phrase of like, who will stand up, right? Like it really puts you in a certain headspace. I remember when we first played it, we played like a little 5-session series. When we were first doing it, it did take us a minute to get the hang of that, right? Because it is slightly counterintuitive to what you're accustomed to in role-playing games, right? But once we got into it, like, it felt good, It's like, the authority says, or I was the authority player at that time, and I would say, who will stand up. And it was great to watch like them all kind of like take a moment. There's like a beat, and then one of them says, I will, and grabs the dice, right? Like it just has this nice energy to it, I guess. And it really, really reflects the idea, I think.
I also love when you're like, they can tell they're waiting for you to say who's going to stand up, and they've got their hand over the dice, and they're just like, all right, I got it.
Yeah. There's that too.
That's you've got them,
Yep. Yeah. One of the things, another thing that I really enjoy about the game in my time with it, and I've played it a few times, is the structure. And in the original text, the structure seems like it very much follows like TV show beats to me. Was that on purpose? Like, is that the idea?
It's literally stolen. Someone asked me who I didn't trust their motive a while ago, where I came up with the idea. And I was like, somewhere. So I did some research. I didn't want to admit this, but it's basically ripped off of Sid Field's like story, the 3-act structure, the book that we understand that phrase from. And it maps out, it's not just the 3 acts. It's got a few other things in there. And I found places in the kind of story that you would tell at a table. I figured out ways you could break up the story structure into good table-sized chunks that felt, not evenly distributed, because you want some faster pace in some places and some like get it over with already pace in other places. But yeah, so that's I don't remember the original question, but I think I nailed the target.
Well, so I guess just before we leave mechanics, for people who have not played Misspent Youth, and I have to imagine a fair number of our listeners are aware of Misspent Youth because we've talked about it before on the show, but just because it's so difficult to get games to the table as a general matter, there might be some people who've never played it. Knowing how much our listeners are really into like mechanics and like how they match up with how mechanics like lead to story, what do you think is going to excite people like mechanically? Like what will people love about it? What do you love about it? Like when you play?
I love when it's really humming, when it's really a story making machine. And early on I was like, why do we call them story games when mostly it's just interaction games, or scene games? I want to make a story game, and I wanted a story that everyone was going to be interacting with. And the game, unless you just are utterly uninterested in engaging with its themes, forces you, if you choose to follow the rules, to sort of do that. And when it's really humming, like everybody is like, all right, I know what my responsibility in this telling story part is. I know what I'm going to be responsible for a few scenes ahead. I know that I need to, in a scene, I can hit on, so that like in the structure of a scene, you'll give some important element that the authority needs to invoke. That's the authority's job. But when the game is going really well, people will be like, hey, I know that this scene is about the unrequited love, that I'm not aware of. So I'm going to put my arm around her, and I'm going to be like, you're such a good friend of mine, and when people know like what their role is in authoring, it just really hums with a story that makes you feel, like I said before, like you could punch capitalism in the face and fix problems,
Yeah. That's awesome. I said I was going to leave mechanics, and then I lied because I just thought of something else that I love about Misspent Youth. I assume we were doing this correctly when we played. This is how I interpreted the rules anyway. But I remember us starting every episode like with just a bunch of like in-character chatter.
Yep.
I loved that. That was so great. It kind of blew my mind, because we're so used to this like sort of like TikTok between the GM and the players, right? Like in terms of like the GM says a thing, now you react to this thing, and now the GM says another thing, and then you react to this thing. And the first time I played Misspent Youth, and I remember the session, the very first session we were doing this, it was like, okay, well, we just start with some in-character chatter. Like we're all just hanging out in our hideout and talking. And
I love that.
I love it. It was so good.
You took it in a really good way that I wish that I had designed. It's sort of, it doesn't call for a scene, which is what it sounded like you guys did. It's more like, so it's something called Friendship Questions, which was inspired by, in Carrie. There's a thing in Carrie, the game about war by Nathan Paletta, where you make up stuff about a character and then you pass it to the right. And then the next person add things about character and passes it to the right. It was inspired by that and a few other probably things like that. But anyway, the way that it works is you ask a question about the friendship between your characters that's happened either before the series starts or between episodes. So it's a way to give life to the friendship between the characters, because I really wanted it to be a friendship question. It's what those questions also give you things to seed scenes off of.
Right.
So at the start of each scene framing, you say not only what's happening, but you give the authority, they're responsible for either bringing in a bad guy you created or addressing a theme either directly or obliquely raised by the question. The friendship question.
Yeah, we did it kind of like almost like a LARP. I mean, we had like a scene where we were just like kind of chattering, and then we would kind of work the questions in, you know, like in the middle of that conversation. I think we got to the same place, but
that sounds so fun. And you know why that doesn't happen? That probably never occurred to me is I've play tested at conventions.
Yeah.
And to get maximum enthusiasm out of people, I wanted to make sure we got to do everything.
Right. Yeah.
You know, so it was very lean. You know, I would always give people a warning when I was running the game, like, this is not how the game should play. You should let it breathe a lot more. Because sometimes I would go from scene to scene and have it just be, all right, we're already in a struggle.
Yeah.
You know, because you can tell a story with the way that the struggle works. You can tell the story of a scene. And sometimes it feels right. But yeah, that's a great way to do it.
It was super fun. It was one of the things that we all remarked on, like, oh yeah, well, like this. It kind of gave us a chance to like kind of feel like we were living in the characters a little bit, and we were really understanding each other and our sort of like group dynamic. It was a little rough at first, but once we got into the swing of it, and we started like kind of organically integrating the questions into those scenes, it worked out really great. Well, so awesome. I could probably talk about Misspent Youth rules and stuff for an hour, but we don't have that much time. So let's talk about the Kickstarter. So the new edition is called Misspent Youth Issue 1.2. I have that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So issue 1 and 1.1, issue 1 just, you know, had a few like tiny little layout errors that I wanted to fix.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had 1.1. And then Will Wheaton happened to my life.
Right. Yes.
Will Wheaton, he came through a Gen Con one time several years ago and walked near the indie booth, and people just started putting games in his hands and like this growing stack of games. And my friend Tracy was like, Will Wheaton's behind you. Go hand him a game. And I've got a picture somewhere on my Facebook of like my game is like highlighted, you know? Right. But anyway, that was before he did his show, I believe. It was just people who are like, because he talked about Fiasco,
mm-hmm.
and it went up through the roof, you know? Plus I've always liked him, you know? I know that there's a lot of Wesley hate, but I always identified with Wesley, and I liked him, you know? So, you know.
I had a total crush on him when I was a kid, so yeah.
Well, there you go. Good. So anyway, he decided on his tabletop show to run my game. And I had, at the time, like 10 copies of my game.
Right, yeah.
And I did not want to fuck this opportunity, the game over, and waste this opportunity. So I quickly got a publisher to help me out with the upfronting costs and stuff. And also, I'm a bad businessman. I think I'm a great writer. I'm a pretty good game designer. I'm a bad businessman. And so Burning Wheel headquarters, who I've known Luke since 2005. Mm-hmm. We've been friends for a long time. I trust him. I like him a lot. And he's offered a great deal. They're taking care of like all the business shit, you know? I'm running the Kickstarter. And so the deal is with issue 1.2, there are many, many tiny little editing fixes that I wanted to have over the years. This is almost it's 2008 when 2010 when this edition came out, 2008 when the first edition came out. So it's about a 10-year-old game or more. The first edition was an ashcan edition. It was a lot of different words. So anyway, I found a lot of little things to be upset about over the years. Yeah. And so I got all this fixed. Also, I think I had some help from Slade Stoller, who offered to go through the text. Yeah. And if I'm getting the wrong person, I'm going to feel terrible, but I'm pretty sure it was Slade. And then I was like, okay, I was talking to the publishing crew and I think Joshua as well. And I don't know anything about Kickstarters in terms of running them. And I've actually only backed a few. And they were like, well, let's give people a reason to back this Kickstarter beyond just here's another book. So what we did was part of what we did for that is we added 5 worlds to the core book.
Okay.
So just 5 examples. It turns out it's every possible example. Every possible option for the authority is contained in those 5 examples, and every possible combination of the options you can pick for your yos are represented in each of the 5 yos in those. So that isn't necessary when you play, but I just decided to be thorough.
Sure. Yeah.
So there's 5 worlds in there to show you a bunch of different ways that you could create a game. So yeah, that's what the 1.2 is. And the main thing to say is that it's not a changed game. It's not, if you're a classic Misspent Youth person that has issue 1.0 or 1.1, you don't necessarily need this. I will also put the 5 worlds online for free.
Oh, cool. Awesome.
In an ugly format, but for
sure,
free.
Yeah. Well, I remember I first checked out the original Misspent Youth. Like, I originally looked at the no art version, right, before I decided to get the big one, or the full one. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a really early version. Like, every term was different, right?
I can't recall. That's not the one I played off of, so it just got me interested in it. That's when I picked up the actual book. So.
Yeah, well, yeah. I also seeded the PDF of the first 1.0 edition, I think, on torrent networks, or I had some friends do it for me because, I like giving that away. I like that anyone can play it if they want to. It's also available on the site if they want.
Cool. Well, so we get these 5 worlds. We have revised text. What else do you have planned for the Kickstarter? Like, in terms of like stretch goals or pledge levels or anything like that?
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of stretch goals.
Okay.
Not to denigrate anybody who does them, and there are good ways to do them, but it seems like mostly to me, like, why not just offer what you want to make, and see if people are willing to take that. Mm-hmm. I had an initial idea that I would maybe stretch a supplement, and Luke Crane, who runs Burning Wheel headquarters, who also works at Kickstarter, who knows a thing or two about Kickstarters, is like, don't do that. Yeah. So yeah, I'm just not a big fan of them. So instead what we have, and that said, I might suddenly have a good idea for one, and then I would do it. Like, maybe a hardcover, but I don't really want to do that. But anyway, so what we decided to do is to create a supplement. And the supplement is called Misspent Youth Sell Out With Me, which is also the name of the Kickstarter. Mm-hmm. And it's going to include, it looks like, I mean, I'm not sure, but it's going to definitely be longer than the core book. Mm-hmm. It's going to include 17 worlds.
Oh, okay. All right. And
so that's like 17 sample settings, like the ones being added to 1.2. Mm-hmm. But by all different authors. I'll read the list in a minute if you're okay with that. I don't know.
Maybe
tell me if that's
how about that?
Yeah. All right. So and then 2 hacks, 2 alternate rule sets for playing the game. So yeah, names Caitlin Bell,
awesome.
Quinn Murphy, Alex Roberts, Jared Sorensen, who also came up with the idea for the Kickstarter video, Daniel Levine, Kimberly Lamb, lots of great people.
Yeah, it's great.
And also several of like my very close friends who have known for many years, who are also good designers, not just some friends of mine. Right. It's a really amazing crew, and the Kickstarter will be out in a few days, so you'll be able to see everybody who's in it.
So the Kickstarter then is to kickstart this version 1.2 of the game plus this supplement Sell Out With Me, right? That's the whole Kickstarter. Right. Okay, great.
To kickstart, technically speaking, it's to kickstart a print run.
Got it. So
this is not one of those print fulfillment things because of how big tabletop is. We expect to get quite a few orders. Sure. That it's to go beyond just like, getting these books out to the backers, which I will be extremely grateful for, but also to fund the print run so that we can sell, to distributors and stuff. Awesome. And so Burning Wheel can sell direct as well. So yeah, the idea is it's going to fund, both of those things, both of the core book reprint and the supplement. We haven't worked out the quantity yet, but that's the idea.
Awesome. Cool. Well, is there anything else you want to say about Misspent Youth before we move on to Giving Me Life?
No, it's funny. This is, as I said, this game's been around for a while, so
Right,
I'm kind of, I feel like I've said it all, and if I said anything more other than to direct questions, I might wind up repeating myself.
That's fine. Well,
which is a terrible pitch for a Kickstarter. Let me say this. I am so excited to be working with these people. These are some of the coolest game designers out there and game writers out there. And also, we just decided we're going to have a bunch of art, a piece of art for each world by a bunch of other great artists. And, we're going to get new art from Jennifer Rogers and layout again by Joshua A.C. Newman. Cool. And editing by Adam Dre again. So we got the whole core crew of the initial book together.
Got all the YLs back, right?
Exactly, yeah, which is perfect because one of the hacks is about people who fix the world. This is by Kimberly Lamb, called "Youth is Wasted on the Young." It's a hack about people who fix the world and now have to come out of retirement to fix the corrupted dream that's gone back into hell. So yeah, it's appropriate that we come out of retirement. I think we're actually pulling Jennifer back into the game design world. She's already evolved beyond us, but she's like, all right, I'll slum with some more. That isn't her words, but that's my take on it, is that she's being kind to us and coming back.
Nice. Awesome. Well, let's go to Give Me Life.
This episode of The Gauntlet is brought to you by Nocturnal Media. Nocturnal Media is proud to announce a new suite of deals to provide funding and distribution for small RPG and game publishing houses. Games from publishers Ben Werner and Werner's Wonderworks, Ryan Schoon and Loremaster Games, Toby Abad and Tag Sessions, John Kennedy and Smug Pug Games, and Robert Denton will be published jointly with Nocturnal Media. These new arrangements allow these creators to focus on designing, writing, and creating evocative, compelling, and vivid role-playing and board games in the manner which they already do. Nocturnal Media will assume most of the role traditionally associated with a publisher, including sales, marketing, and inventory. All of the games will be co-branded with Nocturnal Media and the game's designer. Games already available from two of these creators, Toby Abad's Tag Sessions and Ben Werner's Wonderworks, are now listed on the Nocturnal Media publisher page on drivethrurpg.com. In fact, until the end of June, enjoy 20% off two fabulous samurai-inspired games by these two creators. A Single Moment by Toby Abad is an RPG for two players. The two samurai stared at each other. Once they were friends, brothers, but time has come for honor to be regained and vengeance to be unleashed. Footing adjusted, grips tightened, eyes narrowed. A single moment, and it was over. World of Dew by Ben Werner is a samurai noir game inspired by Japanese Chambara films like The Seven Samurai, Sanjuro, and Memoirs of a Geisha. You play characters, dastardly yakuza, cunning geisha, jaded police detectives, or gaijin smugglers, in noir cities with rain-slicked streets and bodies floating in the gutter. Both of these superior games deserve your attention. Stay tuned to Nocturnal Media's site for more information about these exciting collaborations, with interviews with each creator and previews of upcoming projects, including John Kennedy's Pulsars and Gears of Defiance by Ryan Schoon. Once again, The Gauntlet thanks Nocturnal Media for their support of this podcast.
Okay, it's Giving Me Life. Rob, this is the part of the show where we each discuss something or talk about something that is lately inspiring us or giving us joy. It does not have to be related to role-playing games, though it can be. I like to start on these. So the thing giving me life this week is Glow, the Glow TV show. Oh my God, I'm so fucking excited for the Glow TV show. It's a Netflix series. It's based off of the late 80s, early 90s television program, Glow, the Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling. I will tell you, Rob, that when I was a little 11-year-old gay boy, all I wanted to be was a Glow wrestler. Like that was like there was nothing else in the world that I wanted to be more than a Glow wrestler. I was so like, it was like destination TV for me. And it came on like where I lived. It came on like really early for some reason. It came out like 6 a.m. or something. So I had to like get up really early on Saturdays to watch it. But
probably to keep it out of the view of children.
I think that's probably what it was. Yeah. I would get up really early Saturday mornings. I would watch Glow. I was so into it. And I love wrestling anyway. And so like, this was just like it was so fab. I know why I like it in hindsight. Like in hindsight, I loved it because it was so campy and but also kind of fabulous. It had like very like drag queen sensibilities to it, right? In a way.
Yeah, I love that too. I used to be into wrestling as a kid. I'm not so much anymore. And also I was a young heterosexual at the right time. And I really like that a lot more than the main.
I'm sure your motivations were different than mine, right?
Indeed.
I loved Glow. It was everything to me. So the fact that
and Mark Maron's in it.
Do what? Yeah, Mark Maron's in it. I know,
Mark
that's
Maron
so cool.
And Allison Brie are in it, and I love both of them.
Yeah, I just heard
that's like 90% of my interest. Actually, is Mark Maron. I love him.
I just heard him. He was just on RuPaul's podcast talking about it, and it sounds like I think it's going to be a really neat show. I think as of the day when this goes out, it will already have started, and I will have already watched all of them, but it's not out yet by the time we record. So anyway, I'm super stoked for Glow. Another thing that Netflix is doing, just incidentally, Netflix is like honing in on a really, really specific time in my childhood right now, because they're also doing a Castlevania TV show. And like, I was really into Castlevania at that time too. So
with Warren Ellis.
Yeah,
that's why
I know.
This is the theme.
Yeah,
like,
Netflix is
the creators are getting me in. And again, I loved Castlevania like at the time, but like the idea of Warren Ellis doing an anime on Netflix, I described it as like a word salad. That's awesome.
Yeah. It's bonkers. I'm so into it. So that's what's giving me life. Rob, what's giving you life?
So I am helping create a life.
Indeed.
My girlfriend's pregnant, and will just as the Kickstarter's ending, the baby should be coming as well.
You have a month of like, you have a really intense month to look forward to, basically. Yeah.
I think actually, like, I have a lot of friends who get very anxious about this, and because of the sort of luck that I have with the Will Wheaton attention that it's going to get, and the fact that a baby's coming, like, I think I'm not going to be that concerned about the little ups and downs of the level of funding.
Right,
I'm sure, that said, I'm sure I will be. I'm sure I'll be looking at it every day.
Right, yeah.
But I hope it'll give me some level of armor.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Congratulations. That's always exciting. Awesome. Well, Rob, thanks so much for coming back on the Gauntlet podcast.
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure to be here. I wish I could be here every week.
Where can we find you on, say, social media?
So I'm Robert Bohl, Bohl, on Google+. That's basically my only social media. I am occasionally on Facebook for a few friends, and for Twitter, for both Facebook and Twitter, I do @mentions, but for Twitter, like, I wait to get to a table. So like I say tweets arrive to me at tabletop. So anyway, it's Robert Bohl at all those things.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks again for coming on the show. And listeners, that is our episode. If you want to get in touch with us, we have a G+ community called The Gauntlet. Just go to the community section of G+, search for The Gauntlet. We also have a website. It's gauntlet-rpg.com. And if you love what we do, we would love your support on Patreon, patreon.com/gauntlet. All right. Well, thanks again, Rob. And thanks again, listeners. Take care.